When I was in kindergarten, one of my classmates had their birthday party at this bouncy castle place at a mall. We'd never been to that mall before, since it was rather far from where we lived, and driving over there was a bit of adventure in and of itself. I remember there was this huge storm the day they had the party, and some of the roads were under construction. I think my mom almost turned back at one point, but ultimately we got there. Maybe because of those reasons, the mall was almost completely deserted, even on a Saturday afternoon. This particular mall looked like it had just been renovated, with these painted metal or plastic signs on the entrance. My mom and I huddled under her umbrella as I held onto my classmate's gift, a robot building thing. We walked in the doors and were greeted by some of that classic mall music, as well as the sound of rain hitting the skylights. We came in at the upper level by the food court, and there were only like 5 people eating at the tables. My mom and I walked over to the bouncy castle place, which for the life of me I can't remember the name of. It was in one of the anchor locations, which I assume used to be something like a Sears before it went out of business. My mom had to hold on to me while she tried to check in and the worker gave me a wristband. Then I bolted down one of the aisles between various bouncy castles and slides. Everything was extremely colorful, with mostly primary colors, and looking back, this was essentially the definition of a liminal space. My mom ran after me, and eventually we found our way to this little back room with a sign on the door for the party. We went inside to find the birthday boy along with 2 other kids and their parents. The birthday boy was named Max, and the 2 other kids were Luke and John. Our moms immediately started joking about the weather and the drive over, and Max's mom apologized for the ordeal. The inside of this room was extremely liminal as well, with one of those long lunchroom-style tables with a brightly colored tablecloth underneath a plastic shield. The walls were colored red and yellow, and there were balloons and party favors as well. The other kids and I started running around the table, and Max's mom announced that the pizzas should be arriving in 30 minutes. I vaguely remember her mentioning something about a scavenger hunt, but I don't think we ever did that. Afterwards, we all ran back outside and into one of the inflatable slide attractions. Max, Luke, John, and I stayed together as a group the whole time, and I'm pretty sure no one else showed up. Our class had a lot more people in it, but again, there was the weather and the drive over. At some point right before the pizzas arrived, John made a shocking discovery. There was a downstairs. Our moms, who had also been walking around as a group and trying to stay in our general vicinity, were surprised as well. I guess it made sense, since this was in fact a 2-story mall and we had been on the upper level. Still, it was strange. There was a rectangular opening in the floor, with one escalator on one side and one on the other. The escalators weren't moving though, and the one on the other side wasn't accessible. However, the lights were on downstairs from what we could see, and there were more inflatable attractions. Me and the other boys immediately wanted to run down the escalators, but one of our moms stopped us. Then the pizzas arrived, and we had to go back to that room. The entire time we ate, we were yelling and making up stories about what could be down there. At one point, Max's mom checked with the lady at the front desk and confirmed that yes, we could go down there. We started screaming and ran for the door. I guess our moms thought we'd finished enough of our pizza, or else didn't want to stop us, because a second later we were climbing down the escalator. This is probably a good time to mention that I'm pretty sure we were now the only people in this place. We had seen one other little kid with their parents while running around before, but I guess they left. When we got to the bottom of the lower level, it had pretty much the same stuff as on the upper level. However, since it was on the lower level, it was like 1,000 times cooler. We ran around down there, probably for about 20 minutes, and eventually we wound up in this dragon-themed castle with these huge slides. I think it was based on the movie How to Train Your Dragon, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Max and I had climbed to the top of the platform where you could choose which slide you wanted to go down. But just then, I turned my head and saw something. Standing on the other side of the slides in an area you couldn't access was a man. I didn't scream, but it completely freaked me out. I got Max's attention, and it freaked him out too. The guy was wearing a dark blue hoodie and was just standing on the carpeted floor behind the slides. He seemed to be looking straight ahead at the side of the attraction, so we couldn't see his face. Neither Max nor I knew what to do, so a moment later we just slid down one of the slides and told our parents. They didn't believe us though. It was either Luke or John's mom that made some half-hearted attempt to look around one of the corners, but when she couldn't see through to the other side, she just walked back and laughed. I think Luke and John did believe us though, but when we all climbed to the top of the platform, the man was no longer there. That was strange. It hadn't even been a minute and we hadn't heard anything. There also wasn't any back door there. It was literally the corner of the business and was completely blocked off by inflatable attractions. I guess the man had wedged himself behind or underneath one of them, but we didn't know. Luke and John didn't seem scared, likely because they hadn't actually seen him, but Max and I were. We wanted to go, and told that to the rest of the group, but we didn't head straight back to the escalator. There were like 2 more inflatable attractions we hadn't tried yet, and Luke and John wanted to try them. Eventually Max and I stopped asking to leave, hoping that we'd go straight afterwards. We kept looking around and listening for that man, but we didn't see him. Then what happened next was straight out of a horror movie, and this will be burned into my memory for the rest of my life. Right when we were about to leave, one of our moms screamed. In an instant we all turned and saw what she was looking at. There, directly in front of the escalator, was that same guy in the hoodie. We could see his face now, and his eyes looked completely insane. Our mothers instinctively got in front of us, and when that man started to walk towards us, my mom and I think Lucas's mom teamed up and took him down. I never imagined my mom could do something like that, but before we could think, the other moms started rushing us up the escalator. A moment later I heard a thud and a scream of pain. Then my mom and Lucas's mom came rushing up after us. Max and I almost said something, but our moms yelled at us to be quiet and keep moving. I thought we were going to the front counter where that lady had checked us in, but instead we kept going out of the store. That lady wasn't at the counter anymore. I have no idea where she was. We actually ran into the family restroom. Then my mom shut the door and Max's mom dialed 911. I guess they weren't taking any chances and didn't want to rely on finding a mall cop or making it back to their cars. And in hindsight, that was pretty smart. While we waited, our moms forced us to be quiet. They also turned the lights off so it would appear the bathroom was closed and unoccupied. I can't convey in words how surreal it felt to be waiting together in that cramped bathroom in complete darkness while Max's mom whispered into the phone. I also can't explain the emotion I felt when I overheard her tell the operator that that man had been holding a knife. Apparently when our moms ran towards him, they were able to knock it out of his hand and tackle him to the ground before he could use it. Then they quickly got back up and joined us on the escalator. Finally, after like 10 minutes, we heard a knock and a police officer announced his presence. Max's mom tentatively opened the door, and we were greeted by 2 real cops and a mall cop. They immediately asked us if we were alright, and our moms nodded. As we walked back into the hallway, we saw a few other police officers at some of the other stores. Apparently the mall was going into some kind of lockdown mode as they searched for that person. By that time, the other mall patrons had left, though it wasn't like there were many to begin with. We walked with the officers back over to the bouncy castle place and spoke with the lady who had checked us in. She was already standing at the front counter, talking to another cop. After answering a few questions, the cops told us to stay at the front desk while they checked the rest of the store. Long story short, they never found the guy. The place refunded our money, and Max's mom apologized profusely to all of us, not that she in any way could have predicted what was about to happen. Perhaps it was going through this incident, but Max and I became best friends. We actually still are today. We're also friends with Luke and John. I don't think any of us went back to that mall after this happened, but as it was further away and we didn't have a reason to go there, it didn't make any difference. I still can't help but wonder sometimes who that man was or what his deal was. Was he targeting one of us specifically, or was he just lurking, trying to see if he could catch anyone in the downstairs of that store? And most disturbingly, what would he have done to us if our moms hadn't been there to keep us safe? I was 6 when my little sister was 4, and that summer our parents and us took a cross-country road trip. We lived in Virginia and were driving to Washington State, so it literally was cross-country. Our parents had made a whole itinerary, as they always did, and we'd be away from home for about 3 weeks. Overall, we all had a lot of fun, and I could tell a few other stories about this trip, but what happened on the way back is still one of the most horrific moments of my life. My sister, who I'll call Wendy, got pretty terrified as well. We had spent the last night somewhere in Colorado and were driving towards Oklahoma City. I'm not sure what state we were actually in, but around lunchtime Wendy and I started getting hungry. We usually just eat food out of our cooler or pull off the highway and get fast food, but maybe because it was near the end of the trip and Wendy and I were both antsy, we ended up going to this mall. I don't think our parents had made plans to go there beforehand. Rather, they just took one of the exits with more stuff by it and looked around for a good place to walk. The mall wasn't that big, but it was built on the side of a hill. As this was in the middle of the day and also I think on a weekday, it was practically deserted. Our parents parked near the main entrance and we walked up. As soon as we entered the first of 2 sets of doors, we were greeted by an odor, not necessarily unpleasant, and upon entering the second set, we heard that all too familiar soft jazz music. This entrance led directly into the food court, but there were only like 2 or 3 places open. As we were finally getting to stretch our legs, Wendy and I really wanted to explore. The mall wasn't very big as far as malls go, and it only had one long hallway with the food court near the middle. It also didn't seem to have a little kid's play area. However, the mall was split into 3 different levels with a pair of escalators going between the top and middle sections, and another between the middle and lower sections. The middle section was the largest and had the food court. Of course, Wendy and I were transfixed by this unique layout and couldn't wait to get to the very top and the very bottom. Our parents walked with us up and down the escalators to the top floor, and we noticed that most of the stores were closed, meaning this was most likely a dead mall. The only shops that were open sold things like clothing and arts and crafts, and Wendy and I weren't really interested in that. We wanted to go explore the lower level, however small it may be, but our mom insisted we get something to eat first. We ended up getting hot dogs at one of the places in the food court, and I remember they were really good. We took our hot dogs and walked over to the down escalator, but when the lower section of the mall came into view, it instantly struck us as creepy. For starters, it looked like most of the lights were out and it was actually quite dim. It also appeared to consist of just a few store areas, none of which were open. Our mom even seemed hesitant for us to go down there, but we went down as a group anyway. As we went down the escalator, we saw a row of candy machines between the 2 escalators. There was also a planter that didn't have any plants, and a fountain that didn't have any water. It was actually extremely creepy. Wendy and I ran around the bases of the escalators and the planter and fountain, yelling and pretending to scare each other, while our parents just watched. Eventually they made us go back up to the middle level, as my mom actually wanted to look at some of the clothing in one of the shops. After a few minutes, Wendy and I asked to leave the store to go back around the mall, so our dad and I left while our mom continued to shop. Wendy and I wanted to go back down the escalators to the lower level, but our dad apparently wanted to get another hot dog. He told us we could just go and asked us if we wanted any other food. Now the escalators were only like 50 feet away from the edge of the food court. There wasn't any entrance on the lower level, and we'd also just been down there, so I'm sure he felt it was reasonably safe for us to go there by ourselves. Wendy and I took off running and laughing and ran down the escalator as well. Much like we had before, we started running around the bases of the escalators as well as the row of candy machines. But then I thought I heard something. It sounded like someone's shoe squeaking on the tile floor. I told Wendy to be quiet as I listened for it again. I suspected it was our dad playing with us, and Wendy was giggling as I kept shushing her. I took her hand and we tiptoed out from behind the base of the up escalator and towards the planter and fountain. We didn't see or hear anything though. The planter and fountain weren't super huge, but there was enough space for our dad to hide behind them out of sight. Therefore Wendy and I made a plan where she'd go one way around it and I'd go the other and we'd both catch him. So that's what we did, only our dad wasn't there. At this point I was starting to doubt what I'd heard before, but just then I heard that same squeaking sound. It seemed to be coming from behind the base of the down escalator this time. Wendy started giggling again, and we crouched down behind the planter. A moment later we peeked over the top of it and waited, expecting our dad to walk out at any moment. But he didn't. Then Wendy and I started yelling and ran towards the down escalator, but no one was there. Now I was genuinely confused. Our dad would definitely joke around with us sometimes, but he usually wouldn't make things go on for this long. And something about the situation just seemed off. Then Wendy said something and I turned to see someone duck back behind the up escalator. I barely saw it, but now I was like 95% sure that it wasn't our dad. I grabbed Wendy and told her to be quiet, and she must have sensed the fear in my voice because she finally stopped giggling. I was trying to figure out what to do, since whoever that was by the up escalator, when we both heard footsteps. They were slow footsteps, but there was something else. The person, who I presume was a man, was humming, only it wasn't a regular song. It was more like a bunch of random notes. It sounded like he was walking to the planter, so I took Wendy's hand and got ready to run to the up escalator. But just as we started to sneak around the base of the down escalator, the dude jumped right out in front of us. He must have been throwing his voice somehow. The guy looked completely insane, and that image of him is still burned into my retina. Wendy and I screamed. We ran back around the base of the down escalator, then when we got to the front we just started running up it. Luckily we were able to climb the escalator a lot faster than it pushed us down, and when we got to the top we ran straight for our dad. He had apparently just paid the cashier for his hot dog and hadn't heard our screaming. When Wendy and I explained what happened out of breath, he immediately got angry. Our dad did a quick 360 and then told us to wait with the cashier while he went to go confront that guy. Wendy begged him not to go, but we both knew there was no stopping our dad. We watched him walk quickly to the escalators and then announce in a loud voice, "Is there anyone down there?" Then he went down out of view, and about a minute later he came back up. At almost the same time he walked back over to us, we saw our mom come out of the store. She saw us waiting by the cashier and our dad coming back from the escalator and was immediately confused. This whole time, the cashier, a woman in about her 30s, was just standing there, not knowing what to do. My dad motioned for my mom to come over, and we all reconvened at the front of the hot dog place. My dad first told us that there was no one down there, and then repeated what we had said to our mom. She started flipping out and told us we needed to go immediately. My dad thought for a moment and asked the cashier if she knew anyone who might have threatened us like that, and she said no. Then he asked us to confirm what we saw, and we did. We also told him that no one came up from the lower level while he was down there. Ultimately, we didn't call the cops, mostly because the guy had only just scared us and because he seemed to have already left somehow. Our dad told the cashier that she and the other people in the mall should be on the lookout for anyone suspicious, and she nodded. We got back on the road and left that place behind us. Normally, Wendy and I might have thought our dad didn't believe us, but he seemed to know we were genuine. For a while we didn't say much in the car, but eventually we started talking again. Years later, we've almost gotten to the point where we can joke about it, but it was just so terrifying for me that I'm not sure I'll ever get to that place. I can't help but think about what that guy was doing down there, and more so, how did he leave? It looked like all the old storefronts had black plastic or drywall in front of them, so that still genuinely baffles me. But of course the main question is, what would he have done to me and Wendy if we hadn't gotten away? Back when we were first dating, my wife Olivia and I went to this one movie theater in a mall. It was somewhat far from where we lived, and neither of us had been there before. The reason we went to this particular mall was because there was this school supply store that was having this huge sale, and Olivia, who was and still is an elementary school social studies teacher, really wanted to check it out. The mall was on the larger side and had 2 levels, and when we got there around 1 p.m. on a Saturday, it was pretty packed. I'll skip over some of the details, but Olivia had a lot of fun looking at the different things they had, and we ended up getting around $200 worth of stuff. We walked back and put it in the trunk of my car, and then returned to continue exploring the mall. We decided to see the new Solo movie at the movie theater, and after getting our tickets, we got food at the food court and walked around a little more. Then we came back several minutes before the start time. When we finally entered the theater and the teenager tore off our tickets, we realized that the movie theater actually had a lower level. We had assumed it was all on one level before, and immediately got intrigued. There was this circular opening between the floors that had been just out of view from the main lobby area, and it had one escalator at each side which crossed midway down. As Olivia and I came down the escalator, we noticed how tall the lower level was. It led to this massive circular room with entrances to the theaters and posters and other displays around the edge. There were also a few little hallways butting off that led to more theaters and I presume a service entrance. Olivia and I started joking about how weird this place was, and instead of going straight to our theater, we walked around and into the little hallways. We found the entrance to one of the theaters that wasn't lit up or displaying any showtimes, and decided to explore it. I opened the 2 sets of doors leading inside, and it was pitch black. Olivia followed me through and started giggling as we turned the lights on our phones on. As we went down this narrow interior hallway and out into the main seating section, we shined our lights around. The theater seemed to be deserted and was also dead quiet. Olivia and I went to one of the rows near the back and decided to spend some time there before our movie started. However, not even a minute later we heard a noise. It sounded like someone or something brushing up against a seat, but I couldn't tell exactly what or where it was. We sat up and looked around, but didn't see anything. Olivia and I immediately started to go, but then she let out a scream. There, in the second or third row back from the screen, was someone just standing there. My heart started racing, and I was like 99% sure whoever that was hadn't been standing up a second ago. I also had a hunch that they didn't work at the theater either. Olivia and I quietly made our way back down the steps to where we could turn and go to the exit. I tried to shine my light immediately in front of us and not on that person, but still where I could keep that person in my sight. We got off the steps, and though I tried not to look directly at them, I could now see it was a woman. She was older, with gray hair and wrinkles, and the expression on her face was completely blank. Finally, we turned down the interior walkway back to the doors, and I made sure Olivia was walking in front of me. I turned my head to the side to look behind us as I left, and any moment I was sure that woman would come running after us, but thank God she didn't. Olivia and I thought about what to do, and eventually we went back up the escalators and told one of the front desk workers about the old lady in the theater. We told them we accidentally went into the wrong theater, and when we turned around to leave, that woman stood up suddenly but didn't say anything. The workers told us they'd check it out. Since it didn't seem like there was anything else we could do, because there was a decent number of other people in the theater and we felt relatively safe, Olivia and I decided to go ahead and watch the movie. We took the escalator back downstairs, all the while watching out for that woman. We didn't see her. When we got to our theater, most of the seats were taken and the opening credits were already playing, but we still managed to get aisle seats. Even though we didn't like the thought of that woman possibly still being somewhere nearby, Olivia and I were able to get into the movie. About halfway through, Olivia got some texts, possibly from some of her coworkers, and went outside to check them. Instinctively I asked if she wanted me to come with her, but she insisted I stay and keep watching the movie. She said she was just going to walk right outside the door, check her phone, and come back. So I sat up and pulled my legs in as Olivia got up and walked past me to the aisle. I think this was the part where the characters were infiltrating a mine. 30 seconds later, I saw Olivia come back into my peripheral vision as I continued watching the movie. She walked back up the stairs to where we were sitting, and I pulled my legs in again, but she just stood there. I figured she had just gotten another text, but after like 10 seconds when she still didn't move, I turned to look at her and my heart sank. It wasn't Olivia. It was that same woman from the empty theater. My blood ran cold and I started to say something, but before I could, she let out a maniacal shriek. Immediately everyone turned to look in her direction, and a few people let out screams themselves. My body entered fight or flight mode and I stood up. She didn't reach out to grab me or anything, so I just ran past her and down the stairs. I was the first one out of the theater, and when I got back into the large circular area, I saw Olivia sitting on one of the benches still on her phone. She looked at me, confused, then started to freak out when more people started coming out behind me. I walked over and told her the woman was back and that we should go. Olivia immediately got up and we went back up the escalator to the front desk. I'm not sure if the theater staff had done anything about the woman before, but this time they called mall security and 911. The manager came out and apologized and offered to refund our tickets, which Olivia and I and many of the other people took them up on. While we were waiting at the front desk, we saw 2 cops enter the theater and go down the escalator. Several minutes later they returned, each of them holding on to the woman. Much like before, she was just standing motionless with this blank expression on her face. When they got to the top, the 2 officers had to lead the woman forward. The crowd that had been gathering fell silent and watched as they led the woman to the door. The entire time she just kept looking forward, at no one in particular, with that same expression. Though our encounters with that lady were terrifying in the moment, Olivia and I now joke about it and enjoy telling the story. Now it's kind of a bizarre reminder of the beginning of our relationship, and I think it helped us bond in some way. Thinking back, I still have a lot of questions about that incident. I assumed that lady had some severe mental condition, but where did she come from? And why was she just hiding out inside of that theater? How did she apparently follow us and know what theater we went in and where we sat? And also, what if she had actually tried to attack us? My sister Claire is 2 years older than me and had already gone off to college, and while I was still in high school, she'd drive back and visit us periodically. One time she came in, we decided to go to one of the relatively upscale restaurants in our local mall. It was a pizza place called Mario's, oddly enough, and it had only been there for a month or 2, I think. Claire and I got to the mall around 6 on a Friday night, and the place was packed. The interior had these fancy upholstered booths with wooden tables and dim lights over them, and there were posters of classic Italian artwork and stuff like that on the walls. Part of the restaurant was apparently still under construction, with these wooden panels blocking off part of the seating area on one side. We walked to the front counter and asked how long the wait was. The girl there, who was a bit younger than me, took a while to look things up. Eventually she told us it'd be about 40 minutes. Claire and I discussed things briefly, but decided to put our names on the list and walk the mall in the meantime. Our mall was probably what you'd expect of a typical mall in America. The anchor stores were JCPenney, Dillard's, and Macy's, and the mall was on 2 levels. Mario's was on the upper level near one of the entrances, so we just walked around and went into the top floor of the JCPenney and Dillard's. Claire and I checked back about 30 minutes later, now rather hungry, but this time the girl was gone. We waited for a few minutes, and when she didn't show up, we asked a waitress if she was coming back. The waitress, who immediately seemed annoyed, shrugged her shoulders and walked off. Claire and I just stood there, a little insulted. Right as we were about to leave, we saw the girl walk out from the back of the restaurant. When she arrived, we asked how long the wait was. Like she'd done before, she tried looking things up in their system, and told us it'd be another 30 minutes. At this point, I just wanted to get something in the food court, but Claire was upset. She asked to speak to the girl's manager, but the girl told us she didn't know where he was. I told Claire we should go, but she insisted on speaking with whoever that was and asked the girl to find him. My sister could definitely be obstinate, and I didn't want to try talking her down. The girl left and came back a minute later with this middle-aged guy who didn't seem to know what was going on. He didn't even greet us when he walked up, but instead just looked down at the computer screen in the desk. Then he pointed to something and told the girl to just seat us downstairs. After that, the man walked away, leaving us standing there. The girl told us to follow her in a quiet voice, and we walked to the back of the restaurant. I was pretty sure I'd been to the restaurant that was here before Mario's moved in, and I didn't remember there being a downstairs level. Well, we were on the upper level, so I guess that was possible. Claire and I followed her to a narrowish hallway by the kitchen at the back of the restaurant. There was a fair amount of noise coming from the kitchen, and the hallway was rather warm. We kept walking for about 20 feet and then turned left and went down this narrow wooden staircase with these red curtains at the bottom. I honestly wanted to turn back, but Claire and I were both hungry and Claire had her mind set, so I kept following her down. We went through the curtain into another narrowish hallway that led to this small rectangular room about the size of half a tennis court. It was very obviously still being finished, with one section not even having been painted yet. There were 5 tables with chairs around them, but no one else was sitting down here. There were 2 doors in this room, which I assume led to employee-only areas, and which I assumed this room had been as well before being converted to more seating area. I was like 99% sure they only sat us down here because Claire had insisted on us getting a table. After the girl directed us to one of the tables and gave us our menus, she literally said nothing before turning around and walking back through the curtains and up the stairs. Claire and I just looked at each other with a mix of annoyance and genuine curiosity, as in, what the heck just happened? We started to look at the menus while praying that we wouldn't be forgotten by the waitstaff, but just then someone came through the curtains. Claire and I turned to look, expecting it to be the girl again, but it wasn't. Instead, it was another middle-aged man, wearing a t-shirt and jeans. He stopped immediately after seeing us, and I honestly couldn't blame him for being surprised. I assumed he had come from the kitchen and needed to get something out of his stockroom down here. The man looked around and then back over at us, and then asked us in broken English if we needed something. Claire took the lead and told the man that we were ready to order, and asked if it would be him taking it or someone else. The man again seemed confused, then walked over to our table. I genuinely felt bad for the guy and shot Claire a glance saying we should just let him do whatever it was he needed to. But before I could say anything, the man said he could take our order. Claire and I both noticed he didn't have anything to write on, and based on how he was dressed, I knew he probably wasn't a waiter. Still, Claire started giving her order, and the man would repeat parts of what she said. She confirmed with him that he had gotten everything, and the man vigorously nodded and told her yes. Next, I started to give my order, but as I did so, I noticed how often the man was looking around. At first I figured he was just nervous, maybe because they had expected him back at the kitchen, but now it seemed like he was genuinely afraid someone would find us down here. When I finished giving him my order, I asked if he got it, and he said yes. I expected him to walk back up the stairs at that point, but he didn't. Instead, he smiled at us and then walked over to one of the doors. He turned the knob and opened it a little, then peeked inside. It seemed like he hadn't been sure what was in there. Something didn't feel right, and I quietly whispered to Claire that we should leave. She didn't say anything, but instead watched as the man closed the door and walked to the other one. He peeked inside that one too. It was then that I had the realization that we might be alone in the basement of a restaurant with a man who might not actually work there. I think Claire had the same thought, but right as we got up, the man started smiling and insisting that we sit back down. I said we needed to go back upstairs and check on something, but the man kept telling us to sit and that it would be alright. Claire told the man that we had to go as well, but then he stopped smiling. My heart was pounding, and what followed still feels completely surreal. Claire and I bolted to the curtain and stairs at the same time, and she got there a moment before I did. She started racing up the stairs, and I was right behind her, but a moment later I felt a hand reach out and grab my shin. I fell down into the side of the stairway, and turned to see that man standing just on the other side of the curtains, reaching out and holding my leg. I started to scream. Claire immediately turned around, and I kicked the man with all my might. I managed to land one good kick with my wedge on his face, and knocked him backwards. He let go, and Claire and I both started running up the stairs again. When we got to the top, there was no one in the hallway. I guess they couldn't hear my scream over the noise of the kitchen. Claire and I ran back into the main seating area and started screaming for help. Everyone fell silent, and the manager guy who we saw before came over and tried to calm us down. He seemed to be trying to downplay what we were saying, but Claire got in his face and yelled how her sister was just attacked by a man in the basement. I called 911 and spoke to the operator while my sister continued to argue with the manager. Eventually several staff members came out of the kitchen, and a few minutes later the cops arrived. It was this huge scene, and I'm sure I would have felt way more embarrassed if it wasn't just so surreal. 2 cops went down the stairs, and a minute later brought the man back up in cuffs. Apparently he had been trying to hide in one of those 2 rooms. At that point, I think the overall restaurant manager arrived, and Claire was sure to give him a piece of her mind. We got a full refund, and the manager offered Claire 2 additional meals on the house, but we never went back there. We pressed charges, and learned in court that the man did not in fact work at the restaurant. It was still unclear why he went down to the basement in the first place, too. I won't go into more details about the trial, except to say that I think the outcome was fair. I still think about what happened sometimes, and how that man just reached out and grabbed me, and I'm just glad that my sister was there, and that I was able to get away.